orphans live among us. Of those 143 million, 60 million reside in Asia, home to the largest number of orphan children in the entire world. Many of these orphans also reside in sub-Saharan Africa, where an increase in AIDS has resulted in an overwhelming growth in the number of orphans present today. Neglect, abuse, child slavery, prostitution, disease, war, poverty, abandonment, and accidental causes are many reasons why there are millions of orphans worldwide. Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, and Swaziland are countries which have some of the highest orphan populations worldwide. This is staggering. As followers of Christ, God requires his people to care for the orphan and widow and to look after their needs. Therefore, caring for an orphan is an act of obedience God requires of us. One way you can change the life of an orphan is through the beautiful act of adoption. This action not only transforms a child's world, but is also a great picture of the gospel displayed. To adopt is to give a child a chance at life, and every child deserves this chance. There are numerous reasons why a person should adopt, yet the most important reason is that it depicts the gospel. Orphans are easier to ignore before you know their names. They are easier to ignore before you see their faces. It is easier to pretend they are not real before you hold them in your arms. But once you do, everything changes. This is an example of when I went to Haiti and we worked with an orphanage. This was one of the orphans. I'll pass this around. David Platt, a respected pastor and Christ follower who lives out the gospel each day, wrote this quote after encountering and adopting orphans in impoverished countries. His life depicts the call of every follower of Christ to look after orphans and widows. James 1:27 states, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Therefore, to take care of orphans is an act of obedience God requires of us. He calls us to live such selfless lives that others will see Christ in us. Adopting an orphan is a beautiful selfless act that gives people a reason to think about the gospel. Adoption also depicts the heart of God and his character. In Psalm chapter 68, God is described as a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows who sits the lonely in families. This chapter depicts God as a father to the orphans, a protector and provider. Therefore, as followers of Christ, he commands us to look after the orphan, to protect and provide for these children who have no mother and father and possibly no home due to war, disease, abuse, or child slavery. If we are not caring for orphans, we as followers of Christ are not living out the gospel. The gospel declares that Christ died for all of humankind and that every life matters. Therefore, to adopt is to take care for these children, to take care of neglected and abused children who are deemed unwanted by society and are uncared for and unloved. Therefore, giving up a comfortable, ordinary life so a child can live in a home with nurturing parents and be shown and taught what the gospel is in essence the gospel in action. Therefore, adoption is a beautiful act of obedience which God calls his followers to do. Aside from obeying God, adopting a child is giving orphans the opportunity to have a new life. Adoption changes lives. One family from my church, the Bonds, after being convicted to look after and care for orphans, started the adoption process of adopting 2 boys from Ethiopia. This process was time-consuming and financially difficult. However, God led them through this process. Today, they are in the process of adopting another Ethiopian boy. Krista Bond, the mother, describes life today as difficult yet rewarding. Adoption has increased her faith and trust in God as each day she continues to rely on him as her family weaves through numerous obstacles. This has not only changed the 2 Ethiopian boys' lives that once lived in an orphanage, but has transformed their family and increased their reliance upon God. Therefore, the Bonds are a perfect example of ones who live out the gospel each day through the power of adoption. Another couple from Minneapolis adopted a girl named Talitha, who was born in Georgia. This adoption case was a closed adoption and filled with incredible challenges. At the start of this adoption, Talitha's parents were in their 50s and nervous about this new situation. However, Talitha came to know Christ at 8 years old and has been a wonderful blessing in their lives. This, once again, is a powerful testament to how adoption can change lives. These are only 2 stories of how God has transformed the lives of orphans and families through adoption. which is a beautiful display of the gospel. Through adoption, every child is receiving a new chance at life, to experience the unconditional love of Jesus, the selfless love of their parents and siblings, and to have an opportunity to succeed in life. Every adoption counts because every life matters. My last point about adoption is that adoption allows biological parents the chance to give up their child and allow them to live in a safe and loving home, instead of aborting their babies or taking on the role of a parent prematurely and in an unstable situation. Studies have shown that only 2% of unmarried women at any age place their child up for adoption. This small percentage indicates how believers in Christ should advocate, encourage, and take more significant steps towards adopting more children through unplanned pregnancies. Therefore, when a mother gives her child up for adoption, it in turn allows mothers and fathers who had unwanted or unplanned pregnancies a chance to give their child up to a loving family who is ready and able to care for the basic needs of the child, physically, emotionally, and financially. Adoption thus depicts the love of Christ through families being willing and open to take in a new child despite its circumstances, health issues, or whatever baggage that child may bring with him or her. Adoption is a gateway for women and men to give their children a bright hope and future, instead of having mothers turn towards abortion, which in their eyes may be the only option. A former friend I attended high school with went through this experience, and although this was extremely difficult to give up his child, he knew they were in a loving and safe home. Today, this little boy is adopted by a youth pastor and is thriving physically, mentally, and growing in a loving Christian home. Thus, adoption allows an alternate route for parents with unplanned pregnancies to place their babies into a loving, stable family who will provide for the baby's needs. In conclusion, adoption depicts the gospel. To love and to care for orphans is an act of obedience God requires all of us to do. It is an act that will change your world, as David Platt mentions when he first encountered orphans. And adoption provides an opportunity for a child to have a new chance at life, often for an orphan to thrive and grow in a new setting with stable parents. Adoption shows the child that he or she matters and is valuable, thus reflecting the character and nature of Christ. Finally, adoption is another way for parents who had unplanned pregnancies to give up their child into a stable and loving home. Adoption is a wonderful opportunity to share the love of Christ with the child through words and actions. It is a beautiful display of the gospel. One powerful quote about adoption eloquently wraps this message up, saying, "Family is not defined in our genes, it is built and maintained through love." Thank you.